light and greenery, where God paints the scenery, just two lovely people together. While we love our lover, let blue skies be our coverlet. We can live and laugh at the weather. And if you're good,
I'll search for wood if you want some. Shirley Horn, thank you so much for getting us started here. We are going to talk about two movies about musicians and really about composers, songwriters. One of them, latterly, will be the Bruce Springsteen movie, Deliver Me From Nowhere. We're going to begin with Blue Moon, which is a portrait of Lorenz Hart on one of the last days of his life, also the beginning of the Rodgers and Hammerstein rule of Broadway. It's the opening night of Oklahoma. And we have Ethan Hawke playing the role of Larry Hart. And we have a wonderful panel to discuss this. Rich Holland is founder and principal of CoLab, a Hall of Fame designer and a co-partner at Center. Irene Papoulis taught writing for a long time at Trinity College and does many other things now besides. And Steve Metcalf is the founder and director of the Garmony Concert Series at the University of Hartford's Hart School, a writer, composer, and my partner in many musical crimes, including, I should probably mention, December 4th, we're going to do another holiday special at the Watkinson School's beautiful Foisey Amphitheater with some of the same people we did it with last year. We'll tell you more about that as time goes by. But yeah, let's talk about Blue Moon, the ninth movie directed by Richard Linklater that starred Ethan Hawke. It's, I think, really different from any of the other ones that I can imagine. So let's begin with you, Metcalf, because I worried about asking you to watch this movie and talk about it, just because I know how much the music means to you. It means a similar amount to me, and that sometimes it's hard to watch somebody incarnate a songwriter we love. When he's not at his best, which I think is fair to say. I don't know when Larry Hart's best was, but it's certainly not on that night. So just tell me overall, Steve, about the experience of watching this.
Well, first of all, I really was very much hoping to like this movie because, as kind of sad and unsettling as the Larry Hart story is, it's also the story of a great genius and a great figure in American theater music, and I don't think the man has ever quite gotten his due in various ways. So I was really prepared to like the movie, and I think that preparation lasted roughly up until the first of the two encounters in the movie between Larry and Richard Rodgers, which, as I thought about it later, really formed the sort of crux of the movie itself, in the sense that those conversations kind of seek to define who Larry Hart was as a lyricist and who Richard Rodgers was as a composer. And I think both of those conversations fell far short of the mark. And as a result, I went away from the movie feeling disappointed.
I'm not surprised. I actually really like the movie a lot, but I'm also not surprised that you had that reaction. Irene Papoulis, tell us a little bit about how this went for you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear, what Steve just said, but because I came to it sort of completely naive. I love music. I even love musicals, but I don't really know anything about them. And to me, it was a movie about romantic longing, failure, thwarted talent, alcoholism, all things that I'm interested in. But there was also, I don't know if I can't say I was disappointed, but, just watching it as a movie about a man, an interesting man, and what happened to him. I liked it and I would recommend it, but at the same time, it was lacking in certain ways that maybe we'll get into.
So, Rich, I have a lot of questions for you, but just because of what I know your background to be, too, maybe we could begin with the fact that this movie is a little bit visually claustrophobic, at least in the sense that it never leaves Sardi's. We're in Sardi's the whole night long. We get to have a little side trip to the bathroom, and we get to go into the coat room, for a conversation with Margaret Qualley's character. People wander in and out. Rodgers does come in. Somebody playing Hammerstein comes in. A snotty little kid who turns out to be Stephen Sondheim comes in. But I mean, it's sort of an interesting decision, right? To just anchor yourself in this place. And I'm wondering a little bit, Rich, how that went for you.
So I feel that that's the part of this that didn't work for me. And I love a good claustrophobic. I love claustrophobia in general, right? That there's something about the experience of being hemmed in and boxed in that I love, and yet it's a concern that I continually have, right? What works on the stage doesn't always work in a film. And this is a really clear example of a film that I would die to see as a play.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think it would work as a play.
Oh yeah. It'll be fantastic as a play with this one piano player that's just playing through the entire duration of this play. That would be fantastic. And I think that we zone in with different expectations when we're watching a movie versus when we're paying attention to a theater. And I think that there's also so many things that got thrown away as a movie that wanted to be explored more. For example, like the question about like, well, is he a good love song writer? You know, can he write a good love song? And has he had the lived experience to write a good love song? You know, because the song of unrequited love versus the song, a good love song is a different song, right? So what I found myself doing is humming Blue Moon since you suggested that I watch this movie. And the fascinating thing that I found happening there is I would start humming Blue Moon and get through the first 4 bars. And next thing you know, the thoughts that are in my head is, you go to my head like a sip of sparkling burgundy brew, which is not Blue Moon, right? No. And I go to someone who actually wrote a hell of a love song, right? I just find that as love songs, he honestly didn't deliver it. And I think that this movie had the potential of showing us why. But there are so many themes and ideas that were getting thrown around, like like I think I mentioned, like being bludgeoned with a journal, that we never got to explore any one of them.
Although as you probably know, I would disagree with you about the love songs, and I want to hear what Metcalf has to say about this too. But obviously, My Romance is a superb love song. I think You're Nearer is about as wrenching a love song as I can think of. It's a move you to tears kind of love song, and Metcalf, I want to come back to these scenes that troubled you where Dick Rodgers is talking to Larry Hart. And Larry Hart is kind of importuning him, saying, I'm part of your future. We're going to do some stuff that's like the old stuff we used to do. And Rodgers is kind of parrying a lot of his moves. And one thing I thought, Steve, was, I don't know what Dick Rodgers was like in 1943. I know overall, he himself had a terrible drinking problem and was often a very unreasonable and not easy to deal with person. And having Andrew Scott there playing him as this rather noble fellow for the most part, I thought, wow, Rodgers is getting a break from this movie. But maybe say a little bit more about what you either didn't get that you wanted or what you did hear in those interactions.
Yeah, well, I think you were starting to get to it. I mean, I think the record pretty clearly shows that even by 1943, Dick Rodgers himself was struggling with quite a few demons, some of them not all that different from Larry Hart's. So the idea that he would come across as this kind of wise, avuncular life coach talking to Larry about, how to proceed just seems fraudulent to me, and I think is part of where I started to lose confidence in this movie. But even more than that, the way Dick is portrayed as sort of lecturing Larry about how it's okay to have happy endings, it's okay for the boy to get the girl and for the audience to be happy at the end, makes it sound as if Dick at this moment was selling out. And this is, by the way, a very widespread narrative for some reason, that Dick sold out after he teamed up with Oscar to write this kind of middle-brow sentimental music that was not as artistically, sort of right on spec as his Larry Hart stuff, which I think is just completely wrong. And I just want to say that I think what was really happening is that Dick Rodgers was moving and changing and evolving as a composer with the times, was beginning to explore a larger kind of symphonic sound world in his composing, even operatic, if you will, in some instances, and that he was growing and maturing as a composer. Not that he was selling out, but that he was moving forward, whereas Larry, far from sticking to his artistic integrity or whatever it was really kind of stuck in the conventions of the jazz age, which had been the, sort of high water mark of their partnership. I just think to suggest that a song like This Nearly Was Mine or If I Loved You represents a backward step from what Lady is a Tramp is simply incorrect. And that's what made me feel like Linklater didn't quite get that.
Yeah, my reaction was I don't believe what Rodgers says that Larry Hart doesn't want to do happy endings where the boy gets the girl. I think he totally happy to write that kind of song. I think what he can't do is write You've Got to Be Carefully Taught, because that is a song where you move out of your own orbit. You move into somebody else's orbit. You're talking about a pretty complicated and delicate set of social issues. I don't think that's anywhere in Larry Hart's repertoire, and it's an amazing and I think ultimately very important song. Irene, I want you to talk a little bit with us about the Margaret Qualley character. Her name is Elizabeth Weiland.
Wait, but first, can I just respond to what Steve said too?
Yeah.
Because I think it's a really interesting what you said, because I think I saw Andrew Scott's performance as really not being wise and avuncular as much as being the pain of somebody who, which apparently now I understand is not, doesn't square with what was really going on. But the pain of somebody who's been working with somebody who now is impossible to work with for various reasons, and it really hurts him. And he just says he just wishes he could get past it and grow. They could grow together, but they can't. But he's trying to. He's saying like, yeah, we have to work together in the future. Feeling inside like this is never going to work, which is, I thought it was a really interesting dramatic moment. That's why that was my favorite moment of the movie. But seeing it just as two people, again, more than with a knowledge of the actual relationship that they had.
Yeah. So, but first of all, who wanted to respond to that? I don't want to shut down the conversation. Does somebody else want to say something? Okay. If not, I want to just talk about the Margaret Qualley character, or maybe with all of you for a second. But one of the things that we find out right away is that Larry Hart, a very diminutive guy and a guy who is gay, has conceived this strange, almost muse-like relationship with a young woman who's an undergraduate at Yale, and he's been writing her letters, and he has. It's sort of difficult to, Irene, maybe I'll let you tackle this question, how you would even describe what his attitude is towards her. He certainly has idealized her and romanticized her in a way that seems kind of out of sync with who his own actual identity is. But what did you make of that whole thing?
Yeah, I was wondering about that. And even the bartender was wondering about that. Wait, I thought you went the other way, And I think she was so gorgeous and wonderful and fresh and, sassy and everything. And he created a fantasy like, well, maybe somebody like that could actually love me if, maybe she actually does. That's what it seemed to me in the movie. But she did such a great job of playing that character, that sort of, this is fun to hang out with these guys kind of character. And then it was hopeless. So,
yeah. Richard, before you say what you're going to say, can we agree that going forward in movies, anytime there's a bartender, it should probably be Bobby Cannavale. He should be there at the bar serving drinks for the rest of movie history. Anyway, Richard, what were you going to say?
So, there is to me the undercurrent is in this movie specifically was not the music for me. It was about this idea of the little guy who never gets the princess ever, and I liken it to Quasimodo, Toulouse-Lautrec, John Merrick, so many like great characters who pine and spend their lives pining for a thing that they even know will never be, and they find their way to accepting the crumbs of love as the substitute for love. And that to me is was the most interesting part of this whole movie. This quest that this man who is a genius, who also saw himself, I think, as pitiful. And because of how he saw himself as pitiful, everybody else saw him as pitiful, right? And his attempts to manipulate and calculate to squeeze out every last bit of attention that he could get from the people who are passing him by as life goes on, to me, was the spirit of this movie.
And also choosing an impossible target.
Well, so here's the thing, Irene. I still want to always have that discussion about what does impossible target mean, right?
Yeah.
Because there's something that buys into this idea that that beauty is greater than, right? That charisma is greater than, that the short guy, because he's the little guy, or the unattractive person like John Merrick, doesn't have a soul and a spirit that's so massively expansive that they are the greater choice.
Okay, but I mean, I say impossible just because it just made no sense. Even beyond is not because she was so necessarily so beautiful, as much as it's just like, what?
But if I may say so, as a viewer, Rich, I like your thinking on the little guy trying to get the beautiful princess trope, and I think that's right as I think about it. However, it feels to me like it's almost a second movie. It doesn't connect very easily or plausibly with what we've had for the first hour of the movie, and what we take this thing to be about, which is the turning of a page in American musical theater, and this legendary partnership between two guys who were very successful and are now themselves breaking up. The whole Elizabeth thing just seemed like a tacked on
Exactly.
second story that didn't work as a piece of movie making.
Did it not?
But I think that ultimately for me, none of it worked, right? Because it was so many stories just kind of crammed together as a character sketch that never actually took the time to explore what the true narrative arc of this thing was.
Right. And in that connection, like, what's E.B. White doing there? I mean, that just wasted our time.
I see some of that. The E.B. White thing, I don't quite understand. I think some of it is exactly what you say, though, Steve. It really is, in this sort of Sartre-like claustrophobic environment, a narrative about the changes of culture. And so, yes, we are shifting from the jazz age, as you say, to, Hart's lyrics tended to make Rodgers write music that you could swing, in a way that Hammerstein doesn't. It's a different kind of music. But there's also these kind of harbingers of things that are come. Little Stevie Sondheim is there, and George Roy Hill has this inexplicable cameo as like a Yale undergraduate. There's this sense that the times they are a-changing, and somehow or other, maybe you could wedge Margaret Qualley's character in there as a young woman who's, first of all, she can't be an undergraduate at Yale, but she's obviously somebody who's going to, do something interesting with her life. Besides, go places. I just wondered about that too, Steve, whether what we're seeing is the calendar kind of moving right before our eyes.
Well, I think that's sort of what we've been all saying in a way. It's just hard to make a coherent movie out of those various themes, and for that matter, although I think I disagree maybe with Rich on this, that the music and even the romantic capability of Larry Hart to write honest to goodness love songs is a feature of his resume. Why didn't we hear more music? Why did the piano player sit there and play virtually for the entire movie, but only one or two Rodgers and Hart tunes? Why can't we hear those? Why did we not hear Blue Moon as the music under the credits as they rolled at the end of the movie? I just wonder about these choices.
Maybe that's the problem, that it sounds like, it seems like, I don't know anything. I don't know whether Linklater is a musician at all or has any music. It sounds like it wasn't infused, the making of the movie, with music as much as ideas.
I think there was a piece in the Times that said what they didn't want to do. In the 40s and 50s, there were a lot of movies. There was one, I think, where Mickey Rooney plays Larry Hart.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to make that kind of "and then I wrote" kind of movie. They wanted to make a very different one. But I also agree that if you really love I was surprised. I didn't know this when I came in. And then after 20 minutes, it became clear that probably, Margaret Whiting wasn't going to show up and nail one of these songs or something. So fine. And then you just live with that. And, in a way, Rich, there's something to be said about meeting somebody where they're trying to do their art. This is the movie Linklater and presumably Hawke want to make.
Sure.
And we could be dissatisfied with it. But could we all at least say Hawke is turning in an incredible I had to remind myself 3 times who this was.
He's knocking it out.
Yeah.
He's knocking it out, roll after roll.
Absolutely. And a very courageous performance. And I would give plaudits for attempting a courageous movie, but it doesn't mean that it necessarily lands.
Why would you say courageous?
Well, to make a movie about a Broadway lyricist who's been dead for 3/4 of a century and who, for anybody under the age of 60 is probably a name that they barely know, much less his music, is just on the face of it courageous. And then to make a movie that takes place in a single evening in Sardi's, which is largely a kind of monologue, and as Rich says, really a play shot as a movie, is again a kind of act of bravery these days. So I tip my hat to him.
But I want to add to that, though, Steve, and I agree with you. I tip my hat to him, right? But there's a thing that Larry Hart seemed like he knew, and that Linklater hinted at in this film, but didn't follow the advice, right? Hart seemed like he knew when an idea was just an idea, and he had so many ideas that he was willing to let them go. He'd throw something out there, oh, that didn't stick. Okay, there's a million others after it that are going to resonate, right? What this film didn't do is let go of ideas. It held every last one of them like they were precious, and it killed the movie.
We're gonna have to wrap it up here.
Good point.
I think I like this movie. Maybe Irene and I liked it a little bit better than Rich and Steve did. I liked it a lot. It really stayed with me. The movie's Blue Moon is still playing at Real Artways if you're in the Hartford area. And we are going to do a little shift change here. Rich is going to stay. Aroldis Chapdelaine is warming up in the bullpen right now to come in along with Rebecca Castellani and talk about the Bruce Springsteen movie. So thanks very much to Steve Metcalf and to Irene Papoulis. We'll be back.
Finney, your chance, Finney. Those ants that invaded my pants, Finney. Bewitched, bothered, and bewildered. No more.
Saw her standing on her front lawn, just a twirling her baton. Me and her went for a ride and tennis people died.
That, of course, is the song Nebraska. The singer, however, is Jeremy Allen White, who plays Bruce Springsteen. In the movie Springsteen, Deliver Me from Nowhere. Here to talk about that, Rebecca Castellani, co-founder of Quiet Corner Communications, director of marketing for the Washington Montessori School, Jim Chapdelaine, Emmy-winning musician, patient advocate for people with rare cancers, political troublemaker, and Rich Holland is founder and principal of CoLab, a Hall of Fame designer and co-partner at Center. Springsteen, Deliver Me from Nowhere is in theaters right now. It tells the story of the making of the 1982 album Nebraska, which, if you know, is kind of a departure from what Springsteen is kind of at the peak of his popularity at this moment. He's about as popular as he could possibly get. And suddenly he finds himself dealing with this emotional, psychological hairball that he has to deal with by coughing up a very different kind of album, one that he makes in a very simplistic setting with only one person kind of helping him for the most part, with some not particularly sophisticated equipment, which Jim Chapdelaine, I think, will probably want to critique and explain to us. But anyway, it's about that. And I'm going to just kind of take the temperature of everybody here in the room, so to speak. And Rebecca Castellani, why don't you get us... Nice to have you on, by the way. It's been a little while. And it's been a minute.
To be back.
And so how did this work for you?
Yeah, so, I've always liked Springsteen music. Who doesn't? But I'm not by any means a diehard fan. I knew very little about the surrounding lore. And I actually went into this movie not having watched a single trailer or read a review, which is very rare for me. So I really didn't know what to expect at all. And for the first 15 or 20 minutes, I was like, what is going on? Like, this is not The Boss. This is like a man having a very major depressive episode. Like, I don't know if I can hang for this. But it ended up being a really compelling hook that captured my attention and held it in a way that I struggle with recently with movies. And it really subverted a lot of my expectations for biopics, which, we're used to the story of kind of like our rock god bottoming out in this big dramatic way and then spinning his crash out into creative genius. This was so far from that. It was raw. It was far from glamorous. And it was really leaned into what it's like to suffer a major depressive episode and get past the dysfunction that sort of defines the early part of your life. I mean, I think I would really go so far as to say that this movie is more about processing family systems and navigating depression than it is about the resulting music, which really was a compelling point of view for a biopic and kept my attention in a way that, as I said, movies don't these days.
That's a really interesting observation, and one we probably will want to tease apart a little bit as we go. But Jim Chapdelaine, you're just free to say whatever you want to say.
Well, first of all, Rebecca has been summing things up nicely the entire time. I do think it's a story about family of origin trauma and how to process that if you're like a rock superstar already and not do drugs. I think Springsteen. I like Rebecca. I'm a fan, but I'm not a fanboy. I've been to a couple of shows, and he's like a revivalist and a shaman, and he's really good, and they play for a long time. It's really transforming to see him live. I don't think I have any records, but I know a lot of songs. The Shinolas do a ripping, roaring version of State Trooper, and I think like any holy man, he kind of got crushed and went back to the cave. I couldn't tell what I was feeling when I was watching it. I knew I was feeling a lot of things. It's definitely not a standard biopic, thank God, especially coming off the Dylan movie, which was so flat to me that just this linear, this happened, this happened, this happened. But this movie had big feelings in it, and I didn't even know what they were. So in an empty parking garage afterwards, I saw two of the 8 people that were there. I jumped out of my car and said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And we had a full-on discussion about this movie. And it turns out the wife fell asleep during the movie while the husband wept. So two contradictory opinions, but it really kind of helped me put myself in the middle there.
Was this before or after they tased you?
Yeah, I would pre-tase.
Don't jump out of your car in parking lots at people.
No, I know. I was very cautious.
This is 2025. You can't do stuff like that anymore.
Yeah. And also, I do have all their personal information now.
And her purse while she fell asleep.
Exactly.
All right. So, Rich, we needed one, sort of Springsteen person here. We've got one. So take it away.
So when I was in high school, Kurt Schneider and I went around. We borrowed cars to drive to every record store possible to get every illegal copy of Bruce concert recordings and early takes, demos of music. And my walls were lined with those old cassette tape rack things filled with a chronology of everything that Bruce ever played in front of anybody. I was at a little club once, where there were maybe about 30 people in there, and he came out and pretty much spit on me, you know? So I am your diehard Springsteen fan, right? It's influenced my music probably more than anybody else. I'd say it would be Dylan and Springsteen, though Dylan might have influenced the lyrics more. Springsteen influenced the bravado and the swagger and the like unmistakably, undeniably American guy, who's singing from the heart and is also a bad boy, right? And it's everything that as a high school nerdy geeky kid who read encyclopedias I wanted to be, right? And now in my adult life I've become. So so there is an element of this movie that hits home for me, right? Because you're talking about my subject. And much like the Blue Moon movie, this feels like it's not trying to tell the whole story, just drops into a little segment of it to tell a pivotal piece of the story, right? I feel like you got the pivot wrong. The family history story, Springsteen's been singing about family history from long before he did this album. His issues with his father have been things that I knew of long before Nebraska came out, you know, and his working through that has been, you know, the forever Springsteen before, during, and after Nebraska. What to me this movie was about is he had hit a peak of pop accessibility with The River. Double albums worth of like anybody can consume this stuff, you know, that was all about Bruce. It's about him chasing the girls. It's about, you know, mama sitting in the back seat, yapping in the back seat, you know, and it's all the stuff that was about
mother-in-law, to be clear. It wasn't Gabby Hoffman.
Mother-in-law, right. And there's it was all about Springsteen himself, right? And eventually you run out of that material and you got to start telling a different kind of story. And I think that he had no idea what the different kind of story looked like. And this is the beginning that I see of Springsteen reliably going back to tell other people's stories.
Yeah, and in a way that there's a little bit of a parallel with the conversation we had about Hart and Hammerstein. Hammerstein can tell other people's stories in a way that Hart can't. And in a way, you know, those first two Springsteen albums, they were kind of Larry Hart lyrics, you know, like For You, I Came For You, that whole thing about crawling to the ambulance and all those metaphors and stuff there. That's like a Lorenz Hart kind of thing to do. And now he's turning into, I don't think I'm forcing this analogy, into Hammerstein. He's going to be able to tell other stories. So Rebecca, you know, to do this, they got somebody to play Bruce Springsteen who is a dead ringer. Unfortunately, he's a dead ringer for Barry Manilow. But was that cruel? No, I mean, like,
no,
it's accurate.
Now I can't see him as anything other than Barry Manilow.
Straight on, he kind of looks like that. But I think other than that, it's a pretty interesting performance. And Rebecca, I'm kind of wondering how you felt about it.
Yeah, you know, I always forget his name and just want to call him Carmy because he's so good in The Bear. So I kind of went into it being like, how is Carmy going to pull this off? And he was great. He does look a lot like him, so that helped. But he had the mannerisms down. You know, you watch performance footage and he clearly had done his homework. But it was a very subtle and controlled performance. Like, you know, you worry with these biopics that they're going to turn into caricatures and they're going to go too hard and it just becomes inauthentic and uncanny. It didn't have any of that. It was really nuanced. It was very expressive, very emotive. And I thought he did a really phenomenal job. And I thought his vocal tone was spot on. It closed your eyes. Until you said it was his version at the head of the episode, I thought it was Bruce Springsteen. So it just goes to show he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he's incredibly that. And, you know, Jim, I think one of the interesting, there aren't too many performances besides Jeremy Allen White. There's Odessa Young, is that her name? Who plays this woman he temporarily falls in love with. Paul Walter Hauser, who I always think of as the serial killer in Blackbird, is the guy who's kind of helping record him. But obviously Jeremy Strong, who's kind of an A-list actor at this point, is playing John Landau, the guy who, as a critic, discovers Springsteen and then becomes his producer after having written I Have Seen the Future of Rock and Roll, and his name is Bruce Springsteen. And I thought that, Jim, that was sort of an interesting thing because it's Landau / Strong's job to kind of navigate between where Springsteen is, which is in this dark place where he just doesn't feel he can move down the road if he doesn't do this very eccentric and not necessarily commercial thing, and a record industry that has really fallen in love with Springsteen because with Hungry Heart, songs like that, he can really sell records and get on top 40 radio. And I'm just, as somebody who's been living in the music business pretty much your entire life, I was wondering how you perceived that, the Landau, Jeremy Strong part of this movie.
Well, first of all, Jeremy Strong was really good. They understated Landau, like he wasn't a cartoon figure. I remember when that actually happened. I used to subscribe to a Rolling Stone in high school, and watching that happen. I think maybe like if we were going to follow this all the way through, it's Landau is the first apostle, and becomes like the world's biggest advocate because he truly believed. Mm-hmm. So I think Landau realized, like, I gotta get this guy's back no matter what. And he does a hair turn, and that's a really hard pivot for somebody in business or in the space that he was occupying to translate to the people he's responsible to. But he did it. This is a little off topic, but I have to say, for me, I generally dislike rock biopics because I'm obsessed with, like, I don't know if they would use that sort of curly cable at that point. Those were around. I'm not sure that's the right dials on that Fender 1955. Or did they have a broadcaster or a Telecaster? I could get really down that rabbit hole fast. I had none of that with this. And the recording setup he had, like a lot of us had that exact setup. Mine happened to be a reel-to-reel version of that, but exactly like that. And I did not make Nebraska, but it was so relatable. The other thing I would say that surprised me, I had some tears in my eyes when at a place where most people wouldn't, which is in the studio, and they finally hit Born in the U.S.A. and that everybody could feel this thing is happening for real. And those moments for me are what makes it worth, driving to Long Island to play a gig, is that you can get those moments. All right.
Before we go to Rich, we want to give people a little sense of what that sounds like, the Jeremy Strong, Jeremy Allen White conversations as John Landau and Bruce Springsteen. Here's B1.
It's a process. Right, we're getting a lot of what we're after, and maybe not everything, but a lot.
I know, John. I know we got good stuff, right? But it's these songs, Nebraska, Mansion, what they're doing with Atlantic City. It's not working, right? And these songs, they matter to me.
Okay, hear me out. Just hear me out. Let's put that tape aside for now. Okay, we revisit it. It ain't going anywhere, neither are we. We've got an incredible take on Cover Me, which thankfully we didn't give to Donna Summer. We have Glory Days. I'm going down. In a knockout, I'm on fire. And don't forget, we've got Born in the U.S.A.
Rich, we were saying this before the show started. One concern I have about this is that Springsteen had a lot of control over it,
Yes.
From the selection of Jeremy Allen White all the way through. And to me, although I thought this was a good movie, I didn't love it the way I loved Blue Moon. And I think maybe I just felt like, we're not going to see anything except what Bruce Springsteen wants us to see. And that's inevitably going to leave some stuff out. But you would be more the expert, so I'd love your thoughts.
I think that Springsteen, in his 70s now, is setting up his next evolution because he's not done, right? And that next evolution needs to resculpt some of what I was talking about before, the bad boy, the heartbreaker, and to find that place where you could drop into the absolute sincerity and, the guy who didn't mean to do harm, right? And Bruce was clearly crafting that outcome where for someone like me, I'm perfectly happy watching a movie about a bad boy, right? That just does stuff that he really shouldn't be doing, that knows better every step of the way, but you are who you are and you're gonna be who you're gonna be, right? But when you're kind of trying to control a perception of who you are and your place in history, you get the opportunity like this to rewrite some of the lyrics that I remember really clearly that felt far more authentic than this does right now. So yeah, this whole thing felt like it was controlled. I do think that there was also a missed opportunity in this movie. That there's this love story with this woman in this movie that just didn't really quite hit for me at all. The love story that wasn't explored nearly as much as I would have loved to seen it explored is Bruce and John.
Yeah, that would have been okay. We got about a minute left, and Rebecca, since he said that, I think I'd love to hear you build on that a little bit. This is a woman; she's somebody's sister. She's also working as a waitress in a diner and going to the Stone Pony a lot. I don't know. What did that relationship say anything special to you?
I think it could have been cut and it would have been the same film. I get what it was trying to do and show a locus for his dysfunction and his inability to get close to people. But I thought it could have been, I've read obviously about the issues that he's had with his band. Like, I think you could have conveyed that through something that was more historical and accurate, because I looked it up and apparently she is just a creation for the film. She's not a real person. So I think that sort of did come through, that it was a fiction intended to advance some part of the plot. And I thought that was probably the weakest part, though I did think the actress that played Faye, I think her name was, Odessa Young, did a lovely job with what she was given, which wasn't much. It was kind of underbaked.
Yeah, she's also the same person who wrote all those letters to Lorenz. Hart.
Yeah.
So, and I do want to say, Rich, I'm very excited with the whole idea of Springsteen in his 70s. I think the new album is going to have one cut is going to be called "Get Off My Lawn," and there's another song called "Yelling at Clouds," which I think is going to be really great. All right, we're going to grab a quick break. This wonderful panel will come back and make some recommendations to you. Let's do that.
Sometimes it's like someone took a knife, baby, edgy and dull, and cut a 6-inch valley through the middle of my skull. At night I wake up with the sheets soaking wet and a freight train running through the middle of the headroom. Can cool my desire. Oh, I'm on fire. Oh, I'm on fire.
Time to say some thank yous, starting with the maestro Dylan Reyes, our technical producer. Jonathan McPants produced this episode. We're coming to the end of a week here at Lily Tyson Quality Entertainment Productions, so thanks to her, too. It's Robin Doyen Aiken, our boss, Meg Fitzgerald, and all the other people who help us get these shows on the air. Time to make some recommendations here with our panel. Why don't we get started with Jim Chapdelaine?
I have one recommendation. If you want to go back to sort of a classic music biopic with a long arc that I also found really satisfying, as opposed to most of the other ones, is Revisit Ray. And it's just really great. The Ray Charles story was done really great, and it with big heart.
And actually,
that's all I have.
That's all you got. You actually appear in the Yes biopic, I think, as yourself, but we can't talk about that incident.
It's uncredited.
All right, that was very fast. So, Rebecca Castellani, why don't you take your time if you need to and make some recommendations?
Well, I only have one, but I'll draw it out. So both sonically and in its portrayal of masculinity, this is probably the farthest possible cry from Deliver Me From Nowhere. And that is Lily Allen's new concept album, West End Girl, which basically unpacks the breakdown of her marriage to David Harbour and explores toxic masculinity. as a thing. And she does not pull a single punch on this album. It is very much intended to be listened to as an album. Do not just go to Spotify and look at the top songs and listen to them. You will miss important context. The interplay between the songs is fabulous. So if you like narrative albums, angry women and auto-tune, this one's for you.
Somehow this doesn't come as a shock to me that you like this album. And I should say that we used Lily Allen earlier this week. We did a show about revenge, and we did Smile, which was
classic
really
revenge
her
song.
first hit, I think, and is a great revenge song. And we're also talking about doing a show about breakup albums, which is like its own kind of genre in and of itself. It might be kind of fun. All right, so and like the Marvin Gaye one in particular would be kind of fascinating. So Rich Holland, you've got the floor now.
Yeah. So thinking of these past two movies that we talked about today, this theme of claustrophobia was a big piece of it, right? And not just claustrophobia of space closing in on you, but in Springsteen's case, it was claustrophobia of that space closing in also becoming animated around you, right? And so what I want to recommend is that folks take a trip, and it's the perfect time of year. It's like fall leaves and all that stuff that people in the Northeast like. And go up to Dia Beacon. It's an art museum, and walk the Richard Serra sculptures. Go in them, go around them, and you're gonna feel what it must have felt like for Larry Hart as the world was kind of collapsing on him, and what it must have felt like for Springsteen to be writing about this expansive land that still collapsed right on top of him.
Is this somewhere up on the Hudson? I think I know where this is.
I've been there.
It's in Beacon. Cool. It's in Beacon. It's a very, very, very cool museum, and it's got a whole floor of Richard Serra experiences, and it's filled with, not just paintings and stuff, but it's installation pieces that are very, very provocative.
All right, so I thought, because in fact I do love a lot of this music, and some of it I think strikes people as a little off-putting or hard to get into. I was trying to think of a way, a nice on-ramp to Rodgers and Hart, and maybe even a little bit of Rodgers and Hammerstein. And there's one album that I think would really work for a lot of people. It's by John Pizzarelli, the guitarist who then discovered he was also a pretty terrific vocalist. It's called With a Song in My Heart, and it's a mix. It's got some Rodgers and Hart stuff, and it's got some Rodgers and Hammerstein stuff. And there's something very accessible and friendly about him. He doesn't sound like sort of a 1940s classicist of some kind. He just is making it fun and enjoyable. And for me, his version of You Got to Be Carefully Taught is maybe the most powerful one that I've heard. It's just this very softly sung version with this kind of single kind of chord almost droning in the background, and you really get the very powerful message that Hammerstein is sending about racism and prejudice. And then I would also just say, if you would just like to hear a Rodgers and Hammerstein song or two sung magnificently, on the album Beautiful Baby, which I think probably came out around the same time as Nebraska, the cabaret singer Nancy Lamott does I Have Dreamed, which I think might be one of the most purely gorgeous Rodgers and Hammerstein songs in a wonderful way. She also does Surrey with a Fringe on Top and stuff like that. So anyway.
There was a collaboration that never saw the light of day of Rodgers and Springsteen.
Well, the Rodgers and Springsteen, they noodled around a little bit. They just couldn't get on the same page. But they were both probably pretty depressed at that point. Anyway, thanks very much to this wonderful, wonderful panel. A whole bunch of panelists, really. We started out with Steve Metcalf and Irene Papoulis and Rich Holland. And then Araldus Chapdelaine came in from the bullpen, and also Rebecca Castellani. It's so great to have all of your voices back on the show and your faces on our Zoom screen. We're going to say goodbye for the week. Have a great weekend. We'll be back with more.
Danbury, Waterbury, Oliveberry, Woodbury, hitting on New Britain, Vernon, I already said that one, Avon, Farmington, yeah.